Okay, so another question I have is about something called the separation date, which I think a lot of people hear that lawyers talk about. Oh, when you get a divorce, you should get a separation date. So I wanted to ask you to explain the significance of a separation date and whether, like, common law couples, for instance, do they have to worry about the separation date? What is a separation date?
Okay, so the answer to your question is actually surprisingly complicated, given
Oh
how
no.
simple the question is. No, don't worry
Okay.
about it.
Okay.
So the date of separation usually matters because it can sometimes be the date on which certain time limits begin to run, okay? So the time limits will change depending on the legislation of the province or the territory that you're talking about. The
Okay.
date of separation is not relevant to the Divorce Act, but under the provincial legislation that talks about spousal support and
Yeah.
talks about the division of property and debt,
Yeah.
in some provinces and territories, somebody's right to apply for the division of property is tied to the date of separation, not necessarily to the date of divorce. So in provinces like British Columbia and Alberta, where unmarried spouses are able to apply for a division of family property, their right to do so begins on the date of separation, and then the clock starts ticking. So in British Columbia, you've got 2 years as an unmarried spouse to apply for an order for the division of property and for an order for the payment of spousal support. Right? And if you don't do it within that 2-year time, you may find yourself out of a remedy at all. Now, that isn't a black and white question, because there are circumstances where even the passage of time isn't much of a stumbling block, but you can't be sure, right?
Mhm.
And so if you have any concerns about what does the date of separation mean, a lot of the time it's, are you married or are you living in an unmarried relationship? It certainly depends on the law of your province and territory. And mostly what it tends to relate to is a right to apply for spousal support or the division of property. In Alberta, for example, a spouse has 2 years from the date of divorce to apply, if they're married, to apply for an order for the division of property. The 2
Mhm.
years begins to run from the date of a declaration of irreconcilability for people that are unmarried. So do you mind if I just take a brief little diversion
Sure.
into something called the legal separation?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So first of all, there is, in most provinces and territories, no such thing as a legal separation. People are often under the impression that they need to go see a judge, a lawyer, a rabbi, an imam, a priest who waves a magic wand and says, "Lo, thou art separated," or something like that. It doesn't
Exactly.
work that way, right? Your relationship is over, and you're separated the moment you say, "Well, that's it, can't do it anymore," and then you start to behave as if you are separated, right?
Do you have to
So
have this in writing? Sorry, I just have to, because do you have to have this in writing? Sorry, I'm leaving, but
no,
you have to have it in writing? No? Okay.
no. I mean, the thing is, in most cases, people don't argue about the date of separation, right? But, but remember how I was talking about how there are some provinces where the date of separation is tied to the right to ask for orders about the division of property or spousal support.
Yeah.
In borderline cases where it's 2 years and a month, then people argue about it. Well, we weren't really separated because, we still had sex several times, or we weren't really separated because I said I'm sorry and I bought you a Hallmark card or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes people argue about it, but most of the time they don't, right? But what I'm trying to get across, though, right, is that the date of separation in some provinces is tied to a legal right. And if you don't pay attention to that, you can lose it. But the idea of a legal separation is something else entirely, right? Like I said, people think that they need to go see a lawyer or a judge or a religious official for some sort of certificate that says you are separated. There's no such thing. Nobody gives a shit, right? Like I said, your relationship is over when you've said to your spouse, "That's it, can't do it anymore," and then you behave as if your relationship is over, right? So
Yeah.
in general, but not always, that means not doing chores for each other, not going out to dinner or movies as a couple, stopping presenting yourselves to friends and family as people engaged in a relationship, not doing chores for each other, not eating meals together, not having sex together, not sleeping in the same bedroom. But relationships come in so many different flavors. You can
Right.
still do some of those things and be separated. And in other relationships, you can't do any of them and not be separated, right? So it all depends. But here's the complicated thing. Once upon a time, when as a doorway to getting divorced, as one of the steps along the way, you had to apply for something called a decree nisi, which was a temporary step along the pathway to getting a divorce. We don't call it a decree nisi anymore. In the provinces that still have it, it's usually called a declaration of irreconcilability. And just for a quick historical footnote, because I think all of this is really weird, it actually comes to the ecclesiastic law before the first Divorce Act came into effect in 1857. Because prior to that first Divorce Act coming into effect,
Right.
you could not actually get a divorce, because a marriage in the Commonwealth nations, a marriage was a marriage forever.
Mhm.
And the best you could get was a divorce a mensa e THORO, which is Latin for a divorce from bed and board. And what that kind of divorce did is it was the best you could get. You were still married, but what the divorce a mensa e THORO meant was that you no longer had any more obligation to live together, to have sex with each other, to provide the necessities of life for each other that you did under the old ecclesiastic law. Right?
Interesting.
So while you couldn't get divorced, you could get this thing, which was a legal separation, a pronouncement of a church order freeing you from the obligation to live under the same roof and do all the things that spouses are supposed to do for each other at the common law, right? But then when you had the divorce absolute, that didn't come in until the 1857 Divorce and Matrimonial Causes Act in England, that was a complete severance of the married relationship. It was something called a divorce a vinculo, right? And so to understand where the idea of a legal separation comes from, it goes way back to church law in the 1800s. And so the old legal separation was a divorce a mensa e THORO, which freed you from the obligation to live under the same roof. And
Right.
then there was a divorce a vinculo, or what we then called a divorce absolute, which was a complete breakdown of the marriage bond as if you had never been married, right? So today, we still have the idea of that divorce, but the divorce absolute is now just called a divorce. We don't have a divorce a mensa e THORO anymore, because the old ecclesiastic rules about living together and stuff like that don't apply anymore. And in its place, we have in some provinces what might be considered to be a legal separation, which is that declaration of irreconcilability. And so in some provinces, like Alberta, the declaration of irreconcilability still plays a role in the unwinding of the clock and the time left to apply for spousal support or apply for a division of property. So it's all terribly complicated. But
Oh
suffice
my
it to
God.
say that in general, married people and only married people need to get divorced. There's no longer any difference between a divorce a mensa e THORO or a divorce a vinculo. They're both a divorce absolute, and there's a complete end of the married relationship. In most provinces and territories, we don't need to go through that temporary step of getting a decree nisi, which is sometimes called a declaration of irreconcilability, right?
Right.
It's a straight pathway from separation, as the couple defines it, to a legal divorce. For people who are in unmarried long-term relationships, some provinces, like Alberta, continue to recycle that idea about a declaration of irreconcilability as this formal sort of severance of the obligation to live together. It's all very peculiar, but it changes from province to province. And so, if anything, that's another reason to go see a lawyer when you're
Yep.
thinking about separating. But most of the time, we can boil it down to this. don't worry about a legal separation. There's no such thing. You don't need to worry about it. Your rights are the same yesterday as they were today. Be aware that if you're in an unmarried relationship, sometimes there are time limits that attach to the date of separation. And you need to be aware of that if you're in an unmarried relationship in particular.
Wow.
So that was kind of complicated. So feel free to ask, ask me to expand or clarify, or just shut up. I'm happy to do all of those things.
No, this is really interesting, and I always find that when you explain something with the historical context, it actually makes it easier to understand the law.
Yeah.
But I'm going to invite viewers to
Oh, so one time you're going to have to ask me what a common law relationship means, and we'll talk about that. But anyways,
that's
carry
another
on.
video. Yes, because of that is a whole thing on itself. So
Yes.
I'm going to invite viewers of this video to, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the comments below. Well, thanks so much, Jean Paul. That was very illuminating.
You're welcome.